December 17, 1903. Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina. The morning is cold and windy. Two brothers from Ohio, bicycle mechanics with no formal engineering training, are attempting something that has eluded humanity since Icarus. Their machine sits on a wooden rail pointing into a 27 mph headwind. It's a fragile contraption of wood, wire, and fabric, powered by a homemade engine turning two propellers. Orville Wright lies prone on the lower wing, gripping the controls. Wilbur runs alongside, steadying the wingtip. At 10:35 a.m., the engine roars, the propellers spin, the machine rolls forward along the rail and lifts into the air. For 12 seconds and 120 feet, a powered, heavier-than-air machine carries a human being in controlled flight. It's a distance shorter than a modern airliner's wingspan, but it changes everything. The age of aviation has begun. This is the story of how humans learned to fly, a dream pursued for millennia, attempted by countless inventors, and finally achieved by two determined brothers who combined scientific method, engineering brilliance, and sheer persistence. It's the story of gliders and wind tunnels, of crashes and near-death experiences, of bitter priority disputes and patent wars, and of an invention that would shrink the world, transform warfare, create global commerce, and fulfill humanity's oldest fantasy. The dream of flight is ancient. Greek mythology tells of Daedalus and Icarus, who escaped imprisonment using wings of feathers and wax. Icarus flew too close to the sun, the wax melted, and he fell to his death, a cautionary tale about human ambition. But the desire to fly persisted across cultures. Chinese legends described flying chariots. Persian myths told of flying carpets. The longing to soar like birds was universal. Leonardo da Vinci, the Renaissance genius, studied bird flight obsessively around 1480–1490. He filled notebooks with sketches of flying machines, ornithopters with flapping wings, aerial screws resembling helicopters, parachutes. Leonardo understood that flight required more than imitation. He observed that birds used air resistance, that wings had to be light yet strong, that the body's center of gravity mattered. His designs were visionary but impractical. Human muscle power couldn't generate sufficient force to sustain flight. Still, Leonardo's systematic approach to understanding flight was centuries ahead of his time. For centuries, would-be aviators attempted flight by strapping wings to their arms and jumping from towers, inevitably falling and often dying. These tower jumpers didn't understand that human anatomy and musculature were fundamentally different from birds. We lack the chest muscles, light bones, and muscle-to-weight ratios birds have. Flapping flight for humans was impossible. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction: balloons. In 1783, the Montgolfier brothers in France launched the first hot air balloon carrying humans. Suddenly, humans could fly, not by flapping wings but by being lighter than air. Ballooning became popular, but balloons had severe limitations. They couldn't be steered effectively, going wherever wind blew them. They were useful for observation but not practical transportation. Serious progress on heavier-than-air flight began in the 19th century with gliders. Sir George Cayley, a British baronet, is often called the father of aviation. In 1799, he engraved a silver disc showing the forces acting on an aircraft: lift, drag, thrust, and weight, the four forces still fundamental to flight. Cayley understood that fixed wings could generate lift if moved through air, and that a separate propulsion system was needed. He built and tested gliders, including one that reportedly carried his coachman in 1853, the first adult glider flight, though the terrified coachman quit immediately afterward. Cayley's insight, that wings should be fixed and propulsion separate, was revolutionary. Bird flight wasn't the only model. This opened the possibility of mechanical flight. Otto Lilienthal, a German engineer, became the glider's master. Between 1891 and 1896, Lilienthal made over 2,000 glider flights from artificial hills near Berlin. He built multiple glider designs, systematically testing different configurations. Lilienthal hung beneath his gliders, shifting his body weight to control flight, a method later abandoned but sufficient for short glides. Lilienthal published detailed flight data and photographs, inspiring aviators worldwide. He proved that humans could repeatedly, safely glide and that controlled flight was possible. Tragically, in August 1896, a gust of wind caused Lilienthal to stall and crash from about 50 feet. He broke his spine and died the next day. His last words were reportedly, "Sacrifices must be made." His death shocked the aviation community, but also reinforced the dangers of experimentation. Octave Chanute, a French-American civil engineer, continued glider development. He built upon Lilienthal's work, testing biplane gliders near Lake Michigan in 1896-1897. More importantly, Chanute freely shared information, publishing Progress in Flying Machines, 1894, which cataloged all known aviation experiments. Chanute corresponded with experimenters worldwide, creating an informal network of aviation pioneers. This open exchange contrasted with the later secretiveness and patent disputes that would embitter the field. Meanwhile, powered flight attempts were failing spectacularly. Samuel Langley, secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and a respected scientist, received $50,000 in government funding to build a flying machine, the aerodrome. Langley built steam-powered models that flew successfully in 1896. Encouraged, he scaled up to a full-size machine with a gasoline engine, designed to be catapult-launched from a houseboat on the Potomac River. On October 7, 1903, and again on December 8, 1903, Langley's aerodrome was launched with pilot Charles Manley aboard. Both times, the machine tangled with the launch apparatus and plunged into the river. Manley nearly drowned both times but escaped. The press ridiculed Langley mercilessly. The New York Times declared that powered flight might be possible in 1 million to 10 million years. Langley, humiliated, abandoned aviation research. He died in 1906, unaware that two bicycle mechanics had solved the problem he couldn't. Those bicycle mechanics were Wilbur and Orville Wright, born in 1867 and 1871 in Dayton, Ohio. Their father was a bishop in the United Brethren Church, frequently traveling for work. Their mother, Susan, was mechanically skilled. She built household appliances and toys. The brothers inherited her mechanical aptitude and their father's determination. Neither attended college. Wilbur planned to, but a hockey accident and his mother's terminal illness derailed those plans. Instead, the brothers went into business together, opening a printing shop in 1889, then a bicycle sales and repair shop in 1892. By 1896, they were manufacturing their own bicycles, the Van Cleve and the St. Clair. The bicycle business was successful but not consuming. The brothers, both bachelors, lived with their father and sister, spending evenings reading and discussing ideas. In 1896, news of Lilienthal's death captured their interest. They began reading everything available on flight: Chanute's book, Langley's papers, Lilienthal's articles. In 1899, Wilbur wrote to the Smithsonian requesting information on flight experiments. He received a reading list and began serious study. The Wright brothers approached flight differently than predecessors. Most aviation pioneers were wealthy hobbyists, scientists, or engineers. The Wrights were practical mechanics. They understood bicycles, inherently unstable machines requiring constant rider input for balance. They realized aircraft would be similarly unstable and require active control. This insight was revolutionary. Most experimenters sought inherent stability, aircraft that would naturally right themselves. The Wrights realized this was wrong. Birds constantly adjust their wings for control. Aircraft needed the same. The pilot must actively control the aircraft, not just sit passively. The Wrights identified 3 axes of rotation: pitch, nose up down, roll banking left right, and yaw nose left right. Any aircraft design must control all 3. Previous experimenters had addressed pitch with horizontal tail surfaces. Yaw could be controlled with a vertical rudder, but roll control was unsolved. Lilienthal had shifted body weight, inadequate for larger aircraft. In July 1899, Wilbur had his breakthrough. Watching birds, he noticed they twisted their wingtips to control roll. One afternoon in the bicycle shop, Wilbur absent-mindedly twisted a long rectangular cardboard box, an inner tube box, while talking to a customer. He suddenly realized this wing warping could control an aircraft. If the wingtips could be twisted, increasing lift on one side, decreasing on the other, the aircraft would bank. The Wrights built a biplane kite in August 1899, controlled by wires that warped the wings. It worked beautifully. They'd solved lateral control. Now they needed to test full-sized gliders with a pilot aboard. They needed a location with steady winds, soft landing surfaces, and privacy. Wilbur wrote to the U.S. Weather Bureau. The reply suggested Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, consistent winds, sandy dunes, isolation. In September 1900, Wilbur traveled to Kitty Hawk. Orville joined later. They brought materials for a glider and lived in a tent. The 1900 glider had a 17-foot wingspan and was flown mostly as a kite, with occasional piloted glides. Results were promising but disappointing. Lift was less than calculations predicted. They returned to Dayton for winter. The 1901 glider was larger with a 22-foot wingspan. They returned to Kill Devil Hills south of Kitty Hawk in July 1901. This glider performed worse than the smaller one. It experienced dangerous stalling and unpredictable behavior. Octave Chanute, now 69, visited and watched the troubled experiments. The Wrights returned to Dayton discouraged. Wilbur reportedly told Orville, "Not within 1,000 years will man ever fly." But the Wrights weren't quitters. They suspected published data on lift and wing shapes was wrong. In fall 1901, they built a wind tunnel, a wooden box 6 feet long with a glass top, with a fan blowing air at constant speed. They tested hundreds of miniature wing shapes, meticulously measuring lift and drag. This systematic experimental approach was groundbreaking. Previous experimenters relied on untested theories or limited observations. The Wrights generated data. Their wind tunnel experiments revealed that published tables, particularly Otto Lilienthal's data that everyone used, were significantly inaccurate. Armed with correct data, they designed a new glider incorporating lessons learned. The 1902 glider had a 32-foot wingspan and featured wing warping for roll control, a forward elevator for pitch control, and, after initial tests showed problems, a movable rear rudder for yaw control. In fall 1902, the Wrights made nearly 1,000 glides. The glider performed beautifully. They could turn, circle, fly in crosswinds, and land precisely. They'd mastered gliding. The next challenge was power. They needed a lightweight engine. They contacted manufacturers, but none offered engines light and powerful enough. So they built their own. Charlie Taylor, their bicycle shop mechanic, designed and built a 4-cylinder gasoline engine producing about 12 horsepower and weighing 180 pounds. This power-to-weight ratio was sufficient. Propellers were another challenge. The Wrights initially thought propeller design was well understood from marine propellers. They were wrong. Ship propellers move through water, a dense fluid. Airplane propellers move through air while the propeller itself moves forward. The physics was complex. The brothers argued for hours, switching positions multiple times. Finally, they realized a propeller was a rotating wing, generating lift thrust perpendicular to its plane of rotation. Using their wing data, they designed efficient propellers, two counter-rotating to cancel torque. Their propeller efficiency was over 70%, remarkable for a first attempt and not significantly improved for decades. By September 1903, they had their powered aircraft, the Flyer. It had a 40-foot wingspan, weighed about 600 pounds, and cost approximately $1,000 over $30,000 today. They shipped it to Kill Devil Hills in September, but assembly and engine problems delayed testing. Meanwhile, Langley's second aerodrome failure on December 8 was making headlines. The Wrights, working in obscurity, were closer to success than anyone knew. On December 14, they were ready. They won a coin toss and Wilbur took the first attempt. The flyer lifted off the rail but stalled immediately, crashing after 3.5 seconds. Damage was minor but repairs took 3 days. December 17, 1903 was cold and windy. Not ideal flying weather, but the Wrights worried about further delays. At 10:35 a.m. with Orville at the controls, the flyer lifted off and flew 120 feet in 12 seconds. John Daniels, a lifesaver from the nearby station, captured the moment in history's most famous aviation photograph. The flyer just airborne, Wilbur running alongside. They made 4 flights that morning. The fourth and longest, with Wilbur piloting, lasted 59 seconds and covered 852 feet. It ended when a gust of wind caused the flyer to dive into the sand, damaging the forward elevator. As they discussed repairs, a gust caught the flyer and tumbled it repeatedly, destroying it. It would never fly again. The brothers sent a telegram home. Success: 4 flights Thursday morning, all against 21-mile wind. Started from level with engine power alone, average speed through air. 31 miles, longest 57 seconds, inform press, home Christmas. The press barely noticed. A few newspapers ran short stories, often with inaccurate details. The Dayton papers ignored it entirely. Most people doubted the claim or didn't understand its significance. The Wright brothers, unknown bicycle mechanics, had achieved what wealthy, government-funded scientists couldn't. It seemed implausible. The Wrights returned to Dayton and spent 1904-1905 building improved aircraft and developing practical flying skills. They used a pasture called Huffman Prairie, near Dayton. The 1904 Flyer II made over 100 flights, with the longest covering nearly 3 miles. The 1905 Flyer III was a practical aircraft, stable, controllable, and reliable. On October 5, 1905, Wilbur flew 24.2 miles in 39 minutes, circling the field repeatedly. This was unambiguous proof of controlled, sustained flight. But still, the public and press largely ignored them. The Wrights were secretive, flying in a remote field and not inviting press coverage. They feared patent infringement and wanted to secure financial backing before public demonstrations. This secrecy bred skepticism. In 1906, the Scientific American published articles questioning whether the Wrights had actually flown, suggesting their claims were exaggerated. Meanwhile, aviation was awakening in Europe. Alberto Santos Dumont, a Brazilian living in Paris, made public flights in 1906 in his 14-bis aircraft, winning prizes. His flight of 220 meters in October 1906 was witnessed by thousands and covered by press worldwide. Santos Dumont became celebrated as Europe's first aviator. His aircraft was primitive compared to the Wrights' 1905 Flyer, but it was public. French aviators, skeptical of the Wright claims, began their own experiments. Henry Farman, Gabriel Voisin, and Louis Blériot built aircraft and made progressively longer flights in 1907-1908. The French were convinced they were pioneering aviation, dismissing American claims. The Wrights, finally ready to demonstrate publicly, returned to flying in 1908. Wilbur went to France in August 1908. His first public flight at Le Mans on August 8, 1908 stunned spectators. While French aircraft could barely fly straight, Wilbur executed graceful circles, figure eights, and turns. The French aviators were humbled. They realized the Wright brothers were years ahead. Léon de Lagrange, a French aviator, declared, "We are beaten. We just don't exist." Orville simultaneously demonstrated in America at Fort Myer, Virginia, for the U.S. Army. On September 17, 1908, tragedy struck. A propeller blade cracked, causing loss of control. Orville crashed from 75 feet. His passenger, Lieutenant Thomas Selfridge, died, the first airplane crash fatality. Orville suffered broken ribs, leg, and hip, taking months to recover, but the Army was impressed enough to eventually purchase a Wright Flyer. In 1909, Louis Blériot made history by flying across the English Channel from France to England, 23 miles over water in 37 minutes. This captured global imagination, proving aircraft could travel between countries. Aviation fever swept the world. Air shows and competitions drew enormous crowds. Aviators became celebrities. But legal battles poisoned the field. The Wrights had filed for a patent in 1903, granted in 1906. It covered their method of flight control, particularly wing warping. They aggressively sued anyone they believed infringed their patent: Glenn Curtiss in America, European manufacturers abroad. The patent wars consumed years and poisoned relationships within the aviation community. Glenn Curtiss, a motorcycle manufacturer turned aviator, became the Wrights' primary rival. He developed ailerons, hinged control surfaces on wing trailing edges, for roll control rather than wing warping. The Wrights argued this infringed their control method patent. Curtiss disagreed. Courts initially sided with the Wrights, but appeals continued for years. The patent wars probably slowed American aviation development. European governments, less concerned with patent disputes, supported aviation development. By 1910-1912, European aircraft often surpassed American designs. The irony was bitter. Americans invented the airplane, but Europeans developed aviation. Wilbur Wright died of typhoid fever on May 30, 1912, at just 45. The patent battles and business pressures had exhausted him. Orville continued but never regained his passion for flying. He sold the Wright Company in 1915, retired wealthy, and lived until 1948. He witnessed aviation's transformation from fragile wood-end fabric machines to metal monoplanes to jets breaking the sound barrier. World War I accelerated aviation development. At war's start in 1914, aircraft were reconnaissance tools, unarmed observers spotting enemy positions. By war's end in 1918, specialized fighters, bombers, and ground attack aircraft engaged in aerial combat. Pilots like Germany's Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, and France's René Fonck became legendary. Aircraft technology advanced rapidly: metal construction, enclosed cockpits, machine guns synchronized to fire through propellers, bomb sights, aerial cameras. The war's end left thousands of trained pilots and surplus aircraft. Many became barnstormers, stunt pilots performing at fairs and offering joy rides. They kept aviation in the public eye and trained the next generation of pilots. Others started air mail services, pioneering commercial aviation. Charles Lindbergh's solo transatlantic flight in May 1927, New York to Paris, 3,600 miles in 33.5 hours, made him the world's most famous person overnight. Lindbergh proved long-distance flight was practical, inspiring public confidence in aviation. His spirit of St. Louis symbolized aviation's potential. Commercial aviation emerged in the 1920s-30s. Airlines formed, carrying mail and passengers on expanding routes. Aircraft grew larger, safer, and more comfortable. The Douglas DC-3, introduced in 1935, became aviation's workhorse: reliable, economical, and capable of transcontinental flights. By 1939, over 90% of airline traffic worldwide flew on DC-3s. World War II accelerated aviation beyond recognition. Aircraft became decisive weapons. Fighters controlled airspace, bombers destroyed cities and industries, transport planes moved armies. By 1945, aircraft were all metal, powered by supercharged engines or jets, armed with sophisticated weapons, and built by the tens of thousands. The B-29 Superfortress, which dropped atomic bombs on Japan, was technological marvel with pressurized cabin, remote-controlled guns, and 3,000-mile range. Jet engines, developed independently in Britain and Germany in the late 1930s, revolutionized aviation. Jets were faster, could fly higher, and were mechanically simpler than piston engines. The first jet fighter, Germany's Messerschmitt Me 262, flew in combat in 1944. After the war, jets became dominant. In 1947, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in the rocket-powered Bell X-1. The supersonic age had begun. Commercial jets transformed travel. The Boeing 707, entering service in 1958, crossed the Atlantic in 8 hours, half the time of piston aircraft. Jets made intercontinental travel routine. The Boeing 747, introduced in 1970, carried 400-plus passengers, democratizing international travel. By the 1990s, millions flew annually. The world had shrunk. Aviation's impact is immeasurable. It created global tourism. People routinely travel to distant continents. It enabled global commerce, fresh flowers from Kenya, electronics from China, business people everywhere. It transformed warfare from strategic bombing to drone strikes. It enabled humanitarian aid, medical evacuations, and disaster response. It made the world smaller, more connected, more interdependent. Yet aviation also brought problems. Noise pollution around airports, carbon emissions contributing to climate change, and tourism's environmental impacts are serious concerns. Aviation makes pandemics spread faster. COVID-19 spread globally in weeks partly via air travel. Terrorist threats led to extensive security measures. The benefits are undeniable but not without costs. The Wright brothers' achievement was building on decades of work by Cayley, Lilienthal, Chanute, and others, but adding the crucial elements: systematic experimentation, three-axis control, and practical engineering. They weren't lone geniuses. They stood on giants' shoulders. But they possessed unique combination of mechanical skill, scientific method, determination, and willingness to take risks. Their secrecy and patent battles tarnished their reputation somewhat. Many contemporaries found them difficult, overly protective, and litigious. Yet the patent disputes were understandable. They'd invested years and resources developing flight, and others were profiting from their work. The dispute over first flight persists. Santos Dumont supporters claim his public 1906 flight was aviation's real beginning. Glenn Curtiss supporters argue his contributions rivaled the Wrights. Gustave Whitehead claimed to have flown in Connecticut in 1901, a claim lacking credible evidence but still debated. The Smithsonian Institution long favored Langley, displaying his aerodrome as the first man-carrying aeroplane in the history of the world capable of sustained free flight. This outraged Orville Wright, who sent the original 1903 flyer to London Science Museum in protest. The flyer only returned to America in 1948 after the Smithsonian acknowledged the Wright brothers' priority. Today, consensus recognizes the Wright brothers achieved the first controlled, sustained, powered heavier-than-air flight. Their December 17, 1903 flights met all criteria: powered, not gliding; heavier-than-air, not a balloon; controlled, pilot could steer; and sustained, not just momentary hop. From Icarus to the Wrights to supersonic jets to spacecraft, the dream of flight evolved from myth to reality to routine. What took the Wrights 59 seconds now takes hours to circle the globe. Modern airliners are technological marvels: computers, GPS, autopilot, pressurized cabins, bearing little resemblance to the fragile 1903 flyer. Yet the basic principles, four forces of flight, three-axis control, remain those the Wright brothers mastered. Aviation transformed humanity's relationship with distance and time. Before flight, continents were weeks apart by ship. Now they're hours apart by plane. This compression of space and time reshaped geopolitics, economics, and culture. We live in a world where a virus can spread globally in days, where families separated by oceans video chat casually, where fresh sushi flies from Tokyo to Los Angeles overnight. All because two bicycle mechanics from Ohio figured out how to fly. That cold December morning in 1903, when Orville Wright lifted off the sand for 12 seconds, marked humanity's transition from earthbound to airborne. The flight was short, low, and slow, but it was controlled, powered flight. The impossible became possible, and once possible, it became inevitable that flight would develop, improve, and eventually transform the world. From the Wright Flyer's spruce and muslin to modern carbon fiber composites, from 12-horsepower engines to turbofans producing 100,000 pounds of thrust, from 120-foot hops to spacecraft traveling to Mars, aviation's century-long journey reflects human ingenuity's boundless potential. The Wright brothers didn't just invent the airplane. They opened the sky, proving that with enough determination, careful study, and willingness to fail and learn, humans can achieve what once seemed the exclusive province of birds and gods.